Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Intersection of Business Planning, Risk Management, and Food Safety. This webinar will discuss how food safety plans and planning intersect with your business in two major business areas of growing produce. First, the importance of strong business and marketing plans and how the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, rules impact your business and marketing plans. And second, the importance of adjusting your business plans in order to comply with FSMA principles and the key role that sound record keeping plays. Originally, there was an intent to address how producers can address the costs of problems of recalls should they have to confront such concerns, but including this information would have made the length of the webinar prohibitive, so that portion will be covered in a later webinar. This webinar is part of a series of food safety webinars coordinated and conducted by the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative to help Native American farmers, ranchers, and food producers to begin to understand the importance of food safety and what is necessary to reach compliance under FSMA. Attendees will learn about produce safety, foodborne pathogens, worker health, wildlife, land use, post-harvest handling, and legal issues associated with food safety in Indian country. This series is part of a twofold effort to reach producers and food businesses. The IFAI will soon launch a series of two-day in-person events in regional locations, and you can visit our website at indigenousfoodandag.com/foodsafety to see this listing of in-person workshops and which workshop will be in your area soon. The in-person grower training events will also result in the award of a certificate. The webinars we are hosting will help prepare you for understanding these issues and will help prepare you to participate more deeply in the grower training events. We will not award a certificate for the webinar trainings. We merely are trying to broaden knowledge of the important principles that will be covered in the two-day grower training events. If you look at the handout section of your control panel, you'll see a flyer that contains all the information you'll need to join other webinars in this series. You'll also find the slideshow being presented today. I invite you to visit our website at indigenousfoodandag.com, where you'll find more information about our food safety trainings, downloadable copies of the presentations, and archived videos of the completed webinars. The materials we are using are part of a Produce Safety Alliance approved training. The issues we will cover in business practices, microbiology, and legal issues are additional information our experts think is important to have access to as a grower. All attendees will be muted during the presentation. Today's presenter, Dr. H.L. Goodwin, will take questions at the end of the presentation. Attendees can either use the control panel to raise their hand or submit a question by using the questions feature of the control panel. Today's presentation is possible through a 3-year cooperative agreement between the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the IFAI to provide Native American outreach, training, technical assistance, and education to ensure compliance with FSMA. Our work is part of the broad efforts we will undertake to provide outreach, training, technical assistance, and education on food safety issues. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Dr. H.O. Goodwin, the Senior Economist at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. Dr. Goodwin is a professor and poultry economist at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, a senior economist and food safety director with the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, and the director of student networking and curriculum enhancement for Bumpers College. He joined the faculty of the University of Arkansas's Center of Excellence for Poultry Science in Agricultural Economics and Agribusiness in December 1997. Prior to joining the university, he was the Agricultural and Food Systems Policy Advisor to the Minister of Agriculture in Slovakia and a Fulbright Scholar in Czechoslovakia. He was faculty at Texas A&M's Department of Agricultural Economics and served as the Associate Director of the Texas Agriculture Market Research Center. He received his PhD in Agricultural Economics from Oklahoma State University in 1982. Dr. Goodwin has been involved for many years in food safety training, is certified in HACCP and advanced HACCP, and is a certified Produce Safety Alliance lead trainer. HL, the presentation is yours.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate everyone joining us. This is a very, very important topic. Many people, when they consider the Food Safety Modernization Act, are focused on microbiological and food safety aspects, which obviously are the main thrust of it. But if the business entity that is implementing these food safety procedures is not keenly aware of business planning and risk management and how those are impacted by FISMA and how those interface with food safety, the results will not be positive from a business aspect. So what we're going to do is move through several things, and I'll give you a little background here at the beginning to recap who this would really be most applicable to. The answer is, if you are in the food business, it's applicable to you. Let's review quickly the Food Safety and Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule. This is the first time that there have been mandatory federal standards for growing, harvesting, storing, and packing and distributing fresh produce. And there are instances where growers may be eligible for an exemption or an exclusion. Those are based on which commodities that are grown. Those people growing commodities that are rarely consumed as raw are not covered. They have exclusions. Those are things like dried beans, kidney bean, all your dried beans, garden beets, sugar beets, cashews, sour cherries. There's a long list. There are some 40 of these. Winter squash, sweet potatoes, okra, many things that we're familiar with. If you just think about these, you can figure out what's not rarely consumed raw, or what the crops that are rarely consumed raw. And the list of these is in FISMA. The second is processing activities that include a kill step. For example, if you are growing your produce to go directly to a food processor that's canning, blanching, etc., your product, then that's an exemption. Another exemption based on average annual produce sales. And the fourth one is average annual food sales and sales to qualified end users. I'll get into that in a little bit. But ultimately, if we grow produce, we're responsible to take appropriate food safety risks seriously on our farm, irrespective of whether or not we're excluded or may obtain exclusion under this rule. Okay, Brian. Here's your sales compliance rules. If you are a very small producer, you see between 25,000 and 250,000 in sales, produce sales, you must comply by the rules of that were enacted by FISMA by January 26, 2020. If you're small, you see the definition there, January 26, 2019. Everyone else, 500,000 or more in sales, you must comply by January 26, 2018. And I want to mention that there's been a lot of talk about the agricultural water provisions. We just received notice this week, in fact, that the agricultural water requirements, for which you see in the footnote, you get an additional 2 years beyond your compliance dates, that has been delayed, and they are taking seriously the public comment on agricultural water provisions. And so we don't know what those compliance dates will be, but they will be later than what's indicated originally in FISMA. They want to get this right, and there were some issues with agricultural water, And so they're delaying implementation of the agricultural water requirements for dates beyond what you see there on the screen, plus the 2 years. So, for example, for large producers that have over 500,000 in sales, the compliance date for FSMA is 2018. For agricultural water section of FSMA would be 2020. Now it will be beyond January 26th, 2020, but the exact dates have not been specified. So there's more time to work out the ag water section. What does FSMA change? It brings with it required record keeping. And dependent on whether or not you receive an exclusion, you may have required record keeping accountability for worker health hygiene training, soil amendment assurances, wildlife, domesticated animals and land use, ag water quality monitoring, whether it's production or post-harvest water, and post-harvest handling and sanitation. But ultimately, again, I want to stress all growers should understand and take action to reduce food safety risk on the farm. But the record keeping requirements, and we'll cover this in depth as we move through this webinar, are in place irrespective, some of them irrespective of whether or not you are excluded. And we'll get to that as we move through. So what are we going to cover today? There are the 5 things we're going to cover today. Some of this will be a review for many of you. For some of you, this may be your first pass at these things. But these are all things that are necessary for a vibrant and sustainable, from an economic standpoint, business entity in agricultural production and food distribution. But there are also things that are specifically impacted by FSMA. So we'll go through business plans, record keeping, risk management, FSMA record keeping requirements, and then how that impacts your business plan. So what is a business plan? Essentially, it's an outline that evaluates everything about your business, everything that would impact whether it's economically viable. So it gives you a roadmap, just as you wouldn't go on a trip without having a roadmap, or nowadays the destination into your GPS. It's not wise to start a business without a complete map of where you're going and how you're going to get there. And you see on the right in the red print some things that the Small Business Administration put out on that, what a clear business plan should explain. I will say at this point, the Small Business Administration has some excellent business planning tools, as does the Center for Farm Financial Management at the University of Minnesota. And there are many, many resources at the end of this presentation that you can view. These are also being uploaded on our website in our food safety library through the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative, and you'll get direction on those as we move through the presentation. Okay, Brian. So purpose and format of a business plan. 2 purposes. It helps your business management team meet the specified objectives and goals. Now note I say meet the specified objectives and goals. They have to be specific and they have to be written down. We can't just muddle through our business, and we won't have a way to actually make our decisions appropriately. And secondly, to help sell the feasibility to bankers and other investors when you need capital. So this business plan format that I'm going to briefly outline is a way to have a systematic assessment of everything you need critically to impact and show your business purposes and goals. There are some ways that a business plan is useful. It defines and focuses your objective using the right kind of information and analysis. As you're going through this, you'll discover things that you've omitted or things that are weak in your planning process, as well as things that are strengths. Key is that it shows that the business is planned and well managed. And then again, I bring back that other point, number 4. When you need money, a good business plan helps you secure financing. No one is going to finance a business that hasn't been seriously thought through, because those folks are not so much worried about whether or not you enjoy what you're doing or you're carrying on a family tradition or whatever your underlying goal may be. Their interest is have the people coming to us to get financing thought through this enough so that we will get paid every month. We don't want our board of directors or our stockholders, asking why are we slipping on these loans. They want to make sure there's a plan and an ability to repay. And I've got some a tip down there at the bottom. Use people that you know to review your business plan before you implement it fully and before you go for financing. Okay, Brian. So again, I go back to SBA. They say it very well. Planning is important because you have to know these 6 things. What are you providing your customers? What need does your business fulfill? Who are your customers for your service or product? Why should they buy it from you versus somebody else? How are you going to reach your customers, and where are you going to get the financial resources to start or run your business? These things are true whether you're talking about produce, you're talking about offering a spraying service, packing house. No matter what you're doing, these same aspects apply. So what should I avoid and what should I do? Avoid not placing time limits on your future projections. It's really not very wise to have a 10-year plan and have it set in stone. Planning horizons now need to be in 1-year intervals, and you can have an idea about what you do intermediate wise, but it has to be very flexible, and you have to have periods where you can modify your plan because conditions change so quickly. Very few business plans are accurate in determining how much money they're going to require, and conversely, how much money they're going to make. They're typically over-optimistic and overconfident and unrealistic in estimating the risk and the costs that are associated. So numbers 2 and 3 on the try this column are key. Be very conservative and write down your strategies for every eventuality you can think of that's negative in your business. Don't be too complicated in your language. We're not doing this as a writing exercise. It has to be easy to read, understand, and explain. Not just in communicating to the financial backers, but in communicating to your family and to your workers these goals and your strategies. So there are the business plan components. You can go back and refer to these. I'm going to touch on these briefly, and then we'll move to the next portion of this webinar. Let's look first at the executive summary. Brian, there we go. There we go. Executive summary is pretty simple. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it? It needs also to have some sort of economic and financial component. You write this at the end, and it's just a page or 2 of highlights out of your business plan. So once you've got everything done, how do you summarize it to communicate it briefly? Remember, whoever's backing you or whoever's going to buy into your project or your production enterprise may only have 10 minutes to think about it at first blush. So it has to be short and sweet so it can be communicated. Next slide. What's your business description and mission? Your mission statement, your vision statement have to be specified and outlined. And I will say this, before you make a business plan, a mission statement, a vision statement for your business, sit down with your family and have a personal and family mission statement and vision statement, goals and objectives written out so that when your business succeeds, the business is working for you and you're not working for the business. One of the beauties of putting up with the extra risk and stress of having your own business is being able to be autonomous and have it work for you. If you start working for your business mentally, it's no different than working for another employer. And if you're going to be working for somebody, why take on the stress and risk personally and financially of entering a business? So really think about this stuff. Your business goals have to describe what you want from your business, and your profile has to focus specifically on exactly what you want to do and how you plan to go about it. Have your strategy laid out and then make your tactics to achieve your objectives. Strategy and market focus and planning is the key to this section of your business plan. Think about the market. This is in general, you know, we typically don't think about if we're growing produce in an area, particularly if we may be a smaller grower, we're not thinking about the industry, who participates, what the market trends are typically, but I'm saying we should be thinking about that. Think about the surroundings that you operate in, what your community is like, what economic environment you're operating in, who are your competitors, what are the challenges you're going to face, and really be honest with defining that market. And then look at identifying the specific customer needs that your business will reach. If you're growing perhaps traditional foods, think about the specific needs of your customer for that provision of traditional foods. If you're growing produce for health purposes, think about that. What do people who buy health-focused foods look for? And outline that, figure out your competitive position, and describe how you're going to make yourself successful. Excuse me. Service and product description. What are you selling? How are you going to price it? Talk about your pricing strategy. And this, remember, this is a document for you to plan. It's not something you're going to publicize. So if you have a particularly unique pricing strategy, it's not like you're revealing any secrets. This is your document that you're going to work with you and your banker or your financer. Describe how your service or product is competitive and focus on the consumer benefits. You notice this common theme: competition and consumer benefits. Business planning should focus you on how can I be as competitive as possible, and you become competitive as possible by identifying and focusing on your customer. People want to buy things they need or want, and if you can identify that and package your business plan around that, it will really help you to stay competitive and continue to operate economically sustainable. Now here's a big one, and we might think, well, it's just myself and my spouse, or it's just me, or it's only my family. I don't need to organize or manage. Let me say this: when we get through here and we begin to look at the record keeping requirements and the verification that's necessary, organization and management is a huge deal in FISMA compliance, in environmental compliance, in any of your tax strategies, in anything you do that involves other employees. You must have an organization and management system in place. How are things going to get done? Do you have the management personnel to run your business, or some kind of plan to obtain that assistance? It communicates that there's a sound production management strategy. And then include biographies of key managers or management responsibilities. And again, if it's your family, what's going to happen? Let's say I was running a produce business, and it's myself and my wife and my 3 children. Who's going to do the actual production management if I'm down ill or through an injury? What's going to happen during growing season? Have that laid out so people will know, and so that you'll know. There have to be individuals identified to carry out these specific aspects of the FSMA regulation or of any other production and management that you're involved in. Have a plan. Marketing plan and sales strategy. I could go on for hours about marketing plans. In fact, I've presented multi-day seminars and in fact taught 40 to 60-hour courses on market planning. I'm not going to go into that, obviously, but here are things you need to do. You need to have a marketing plan that describes what you're marketing, how you'll market it, when and where you'll market it, to whom are you going to sell your products. And it also needs to give a description of the current market and what you think the market will be in 3 to 5 years. And this helps you identify needs for expansion or modernization of your facilities. How are you going to comply with the competition and the factors facing you in the future? Have a plan to create new customers. You may not always have the same customers. We live in a very mobile society. We have, we already talked about competition. Someone may outcompete you, and you may have to go get new customers. How are you going to stand out from the other people selling your product? How are you going to get it to them at the best place, the best time, and the right quantities at a fair and competitive price? These are the things you have to identify in your market plan. Okay, next slide. Figure out groups you can best serve, figure out what their needs are, and adapt to changes in the market. For example, if you're growing produce to supply and you want to supply into perhaps a tribal feeding program for the elderly, what do they need? Say that's really your driving mission. What do they need? How can you best serve them? What happens when the market changes? And then the 4 P's of marketing: promotion, place, where you're going to sell it, production, and the price. Those are key on any activity that you're going into from the business realm. Okay, next slide. Financial management. This we're planning a full webinar on this at a later date, but I'll just go through the 3 things that are necessary. And again, when you start looking at FSMA, and Brian mentioned at the beginning about dealing with costs of implementing FSMA record keeping and also the potential for recall, you need to have these 3 things in your disposal. The balance sheet, which describes your solvency position, income statement, which gives a measure of profitability, and cash flow plan, which gives you a liquidity measure. And we'll talk about these in the next slides. Go ahead, Brian. Balance sheet. This is at a point in time. It shows assets, liabilities, and net worth. And it's a snapshot in time. So there you see, you take your assets and subtract your liabilities, that's your net worth. There's an excellent example from the Small Business Administration. You can go on there, and we've got resources, again, that we reference at the end of this presentation. Income statement shows how you performed between two balance sheet periods. So if your balance sheets, if you do a balance sheet every quarter, then it's what's your 3 months profit picture. If it's once a year, then what is it for that year? And it shows outputs, costs, and incomes. Revenue minus expense equals profit, or hopefully not, loss. So the income statement is so important. And then the cash flow statement. Cash flow plans the future inflows and outflows of cash. Most small businesses fail not because they're incompetent or because they don't know what they can't perform their business, or any of those reasons. They fail because they run out of cash. Their accounts payable exceed their accounts receivable, and so the incoming cash can't cover their expenses and they have to close the doors. This happens frequently. So cash flow statements, monthly statement of cash on hand is so important. And again, SBA has an excellent resource. So in review, a business plan needs to have an executive summary, be concise to the point, be reviewed by someone with experience, and communicate clearly what, how, and why you do what you do. Use the business plan, distribute copies to people involved in the business, review it periodically, monitor your progress, keep records, and we're going into that next. Compare actual with projected outcomes and make changes to the plan as you need. So plan, but be flexible and evaluate along the way. This can only be done by keeping records. So let's look at record keeping overview. Briefly, there's several good components to any kind of financial record keeping. There are computers and numerous software packages out there to assist you. I think I've mentioned in a webinar before, we sort of used the boot box method. We threw our receipts in a boot box, and at the end of the year, we'd pull them out and organize them and file our taxes. We did that only for tax liability and to find out one time a year what we were doing. We weren't good record keepers, much to our detriment. We were successful, but it's only because we were pretty good at what we did. And who knows, if we'd used records, we may have been more successful. County extension agents may be a good source for beginning farm financial statements. Your FFA teachers are also good sources. Farm credit system, farm service agency. And of course the internet. There are many places to get farm financial statement and record keeping guidance. And then there are do's and don'ts for farm record keeping, and we'll go through those. So let's get started. What do? Here's what you do. You identify what records you need. You commit financially to what you need. If you need a computer and a software package, commit to it financially. Commit the time to do it. And the minimum financial records you need are your inventory of assets and liabilities, transaction journal listing incomes and expenses. Why is this important? It's important because it's how you do your cash flow. Copies of the tax forms and copies of all employment records, whether it's for you or for employees of your business. So let's look at the individual financial records needed. A good financial record keeping system consists of the following. These minimum requirements that I just mentioned, plus a balance sheet, an income statement, cash flow statement, and enterprise budget. So we've gone over the first three. What's an enterprise budget? So make sure these are timely and complete. We'll cover what an enterprise budget is just here in a minute. How long do you keep these records? There's a nice table for how long you should keep records. You need to have this somewhere and be able to refer back to it. But these are the traditional best practices on financial record maintenance. Financial statements. Financial statements you can get again from your Cooperative Extension Service. There are all kinds of things there that they have, and there are many online sources. And we are beginning to assemble templates to put on our IFAI website, and there are other places that you can get these referenced at the end of this webinar. Now, I mentioned enterprise budgets a while ago. Often forgotten, but vitally important. Enterprise budgets, budgeting is trying to plan future expenditures and match these in some way to sales or other inflows. Nobody knows the future, but budgeting results will usually be wrong, but it's essential to try and budget. So why you do this is you may think that you're making money on something, but in fact you're not. So it's key. It's key that you have budgets for each of your enterprise activities. What are some record keeping alternatives? Note that except in a very few cases, the law doesn't require any specific kind of records. So you can choose whatever is best suited to your business. They need to show your income for your tax year. You need to keep a complete and separate records for each business in which you're involved. So let's look at what some of these specifically are. Hand-kept records. A lot of times, if you got a real simple operation, hand-kept records may be just fine. And we'll see later that for FISMA compliance, hand-kept records are fine for many of the things. But I will say this, once you get a certain number of records, it's nice to have them in an organized fashion in a computer, because if your handwriting is like mine, they may not be worth much. Farm account books. Anyone that was in FFA or 4-H, farm account books have been around for 100 years. And so this is just a straightforward way of looking at your records. Again, it's good for small and part-time farmers, and gives you all the basic information you need. You can get these to a lot of sources. Farm Service Agency, Farm Credit System. There are farm management firms that you can get these from, maybe your Cooperative Extension Services. Many people will use computers, and the most important use for a computer, despite what your children may tell you, is for farm financial record keeping and analysis. Okay, computerized records. It used to be very difficult and very expensive. These things are becoming much simpler to use, increasingly affordable, and they're being tailor-made for manipulating data inside cash flow statements, profit and loss, pictorial representation of things that you're doing, production trends, whatever, marketing percentages, anything you can dream up practically has become very easy to navigate on computers and the computer software packages that exist nowadays. So what are the advantages? They're immediately available. You can generate key reports. Now that assumes that that your computer's not down or your internet's not down or something else. And it also assumes that you have them located in your computer files somewhere that's identifiable. I'd like to keep a list of mine, my key files and passwords on a 3x5 card that I keep in my desktop so that I don't have to remember all these different things. It improves your planning and budgeting capabilities. It also helps you evaluate when you make purchases, whether or not that's good, and it allows you to pinpoint and eliminate less than profitable enterprises. And that's why, again, that we go through enterprise budgeting. What are some commercial software packages that are useful and that make sense? One of them is FarmWorks. FarmWorks is particularly interesting because it can be divided and used for field by field comparison and whole farm record keeping. If you have several fields that grow several different crops, you can keep them segmented and then aggregate those when you do enterprise budgets. Some others that are excellent, and FinPack, AgPlan is one I don't have on there. AgPlan, it's one of the Center for Farm Financial Management resources at the University of Minnesota. Quicken, it's available, not that I'm pushing Walmart, but it's available at every Walmart store. It's inexpensive. I think you can get Quicken for $59. There's a link to Oklahoma State. They use Quicken. They have some excellent fact sheets. And QuickBooks. If you have employees, QuickBooks is one that is really nice because it allows you to handle payroll and personnel records. So what are some do's and don'ts? Do keep records. Do put someone in charge. You know, I work with a lot of poultry growers, and I have found that the more successful poultry growers have someone in charge of their records, and it's typically the woman because she pays more attention to the detail. I'm not trying to be stereotypical, I'm just telling you the facts. Provide them the right tools. Provide dedicated space and environment to keep your records. Don't try to, you know, have a place where you go to keep your records and update them. And if you can't do that, hire somebody to do it. You know, if you have a teenager in the home, hire them. You're probably giving them money anyway. Hire them to keep your records, and then you can deduct the money you give them. Keep business and personal accounts separate. I should have put this like in the biggest font possible. Keep business and personal accounts separate. This is absolute necessity. And consider record keeping a vital part of your business. Don't treat it like an unwelcome guest. It's so vital. Don't wait until next year to do this year's bookkeeping. You're going to forget things, and the more you build up, the more of a pain in the neck it's going to be. Act like record keeping. Don't act like record keeping isn't a real job. It is a job. Treat it as such. Don't play with balance sheet values. Don't jiggle things around to make it look better than it is. And if you see a trend, don't ignore it. Pay heed and plan accordingly. So now let's talk a little bit about risk assessment. I'll go through this fairly quickly because I want to get to the FSMA portion of this. There are 5 ways that you can handle risk. You can retain the risk. You can shift it to someone else through insurance. You can reduce risk by diversifying perhaps, or having entering into more stable arrangements, maybe contracts. You can self-insure by holding back funds to cover losses, and you can avoid risk totally. Now, about the only way you can avoid risk is to not be in farming. So textbook, that's a way to handle risk, but it's not very realistic if you're going to be in the produce business. Variability in outcomes and production pose risk to achieving your financial goals. There's some major sources of production risk there on the screen. We're all aware of these. Some things that we generally don't think of as pests in the produce business. Wildlife and domestic animals are pests, and there is a requirement in FISMA that you must, in fact, take care to limit animal intrusion or at least handle animal intrusion by segmenting your harvest. Next slide. Enterprise diversification. Obviously, if you have many different kinds of crops, you're diversified, that spreads your risk. If you have off-farm employment, that spreads your risk. You've always got money. The reality is, for when I was growing up, if there wasn't off-farm employment, we couldn't have paid all the bills. We didn't make enough to pay for our living expense. So we had to have off-farm and farming income to make it. So let's go to the next slide. Contract production is a way to do this. Production contracts between a producer and an ag business firm, some kind of price guarantee. There are ways that you can have certain types of produce insurance under certain conditions through Farm Service Agency. New technologies, new varieties, precision farming, lower input costs, higher crop yields, cost-effective use of crop inputs like irrigation. Drip irrigation is a little more capital intensive if you're in an area that requires certain kind of water use by plants or that's limited with water. You may want to consider the drip irrigation versus overhead or flow. It also has advantages when we look at the produce safety rule with agricultural water. It's not as restrictive because the water is not getting on the produce. Marketing risk. Marketing risk are obvious to everyone. I just wanted to point those out, that this is the link between production and profit is your market. Again, plan. Know the level of risk you're comfortable with. Be willing to update and increase your skills. Have a long-term plan. Keep your goals and objectives of your business as the building blocks, and use prices received locally or regionally, not some national price when you're looking at your marketing plan. Three basic components of financial risk: cost and availability of debt capital, ability to meet cash flow, and the ability to maintain and grow equity. I will mention that there are additional costs that will be incurred with the FSMA record keeping and meeting some of these requirements. So you need to be aware of the financial aspect of that and be able to secure debt capital to address those needs and regulatory requirements. What are some risk tools? We've already mentioned these: balance sheet, income statement, statement of owner's equity, cash flows, interest rate increases. There are things that you can work with your lender to ensure that your interest rates will not be escalating. You have to make sure you have enough liquidity to keep your cash flow going. And the bottom one there, and this is the dead fish that we all don't want to think about: controlling and meeting family living costs. I mentioned earlier that people were overly optimistic in their economic plans for their business. They're also not realistic. They underestimate family living expenses. and they don't really control them very well. This is a key difficulty with agricultural businesses that are beginning and that are small and medium. People have a real problem keeping these. That's why you want to keep the accounts separate. They have a problem being accurate and realistic enough in estimating their family living costs. Legal risks. Janie Hipp will give a webinar next week, and I'd urge everyone to listen to this. The title of it is "So You Think You're Exempt?" And it talks about, in large part, the legal risk of not complying with FSMA. There are huge legal risks associated with FSMA if you're not in compliance, but there are also these other kind of legal risks that everyone is more familiar with, and it's a key risk area. Next slide. What are some legal risk tools? Operating under the proper entity structure, partnership, limited liability company. How are you going to be set up? Have written contracts, comply with your statutory mandates for taxes, payment obligations, wage, hour, and safety, pesticides, herbicides, record keeping requirements. Have all this stuff figured out and comply with these statutory mandates. You will save yourself a lot of trouble. Human resource risk is the fifth category, and it's human resources are both a risk and a risk tool. It's the core of this is managing people and having a clear definition of how plans and decisions are made. People management, having job analysis and descriptions, having set hiring practices. And I've got this in bold, orientation and training. And we will see just in about 5 minutes when we get into the FSMA section of this specific webinar, worker orientation and worker training is huge. It's a big need on your business. You even have to need to think about your visitors. You need to think about, if it's a pick your own, about people who come on to harvest. This has to be thought through, and there has to be orientation and training. What are your employer-employee interactions? If you have employees that are less than seasonal, how do you appraise their performance? How do you pay them? What are your disciplinary practices? All this stuff needs to be thought out ahead of time and laid out in a policy. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but it should be laid out so that everybody knows, just to avoid the headache and the cost and the hassle. And then the last one I have there is estate planning. This is a topic for another webinar, but please, please, please have an estate plan for your operation and for your family. So what about risk management? Let's do a checkup. Are my goals written, reasonable, and measurable? Are they attainable in my lifetime? Have I shared goals with everyone involved in the business? And have they shared their goals with me? This includes your family. And then the last one, do I have a risk management plan for each aspect of my operation? Whether it's production, whether it's marketing, whether it's legal, whether it's human resources, is it financial? Do I have a plan for each aspect of my operation? Further, have I identified my risk management tolerance? How risky am I going to be? If you really love risk, do a sloppy job on your records. If you really love risk, skirt and don't really comply with everything that's specific in the law. If you're risk averse, like most people, we just need to do what we know and what's expected, and we'll be all right. What risk can keep me from attaining my goals? What am I comfortable retaining and managing, and what am I going to shift to somebody else? Here's one. What's my last insurance checkup? And this includes health, life, casualty, property, disability, long-term care, medical, and yes, perhaps even crop insurance. And then the last one I have in bold, do I have a record-keeping system that is functional and kept up to date? That is the biggest way to manage your risk, is with proper record keeping, so you can analyze what's happening on your operation. So let's go to the next part of this. What about FSMA? Here's where we get a little into the weeds, so bear with me. This is key for everyone. What does FSMA require? Unless specified otherwise, all records must include the following: name and location of the farm, values and observations obtained during any monitoring, adequate description of covered produce. What's the name, specific variety, brand, any lot number or other identifier. And you may say to yourself, I don't have a lot number. What's a lot number? A lot number you assign for any period of time, and you can create these own lot numbers. And there's going to be a webinar on post-harvest management later in the year. But if you have a specific field that grows, let's say, a specific type of pepper, and you're harvesting those, you harvest them 3 times a week. And so if you want to have that week's production, say that's the first week of the year, if you want that to be lot 1 for 2017 of peppers, that needs to be specified. Why? Because if there's a problem, you need to keep a record of who you sell that product to, who that lot went to, so it can be recalled. And again, this will be in a follow-up seminar, but just to give you a teaser, that's why this is in here. Location of a growing area or other area, field, packing shed, date and time of the activity. They have to be created at the time the activity is performed, be accurate, legible, indelible, dated, signed, or initialed. Okay, so put them in ink, have them covered with something, have them available, and have them initialed by somebody that's responsible. What about your claim or your attempt to obtain exemption? And there is an entire package of forms that we have that will be available online. It's called required record keeping forms. And one of the things that you have to show is your production and sales for a 3-year period, because you remember those thresholds. Under $25,000 in sales, you're not covered. Between $25,000 and $250,000, you're at one level of coverage, etc. This has to be done by enterprise for a 3-year period. So because it's an average, you may have 30,000 one year and 15 the next year, and then 20 the next year. In that case, you'd be under the 25,000 threshold. So these are things that will, play into that exemption. Documentation accompanying produce that the food is not processed to adequately reduce presence of microorganisms. That's something that's going to undergo further processing. Or a written assurance from the customer that produce will be processed to reduce microorganisms. So you have to support the further processing step, as well as the step for the sales threshold records. So this is required. There's some more detail on this. You have to have information that you satisfy the criteria for an exemption. You have to have a written record that the grower has performed annual review and verification of the eligibility for exemption. And it has to be reviewed, dated, and signed by a supervisor or responsible party within a reasonable time. You have to date your receipts. They don't need to be signed. They have to be dated. This is why, remember way back at the first when I talked about organization and management, This is why organization management's needed. There have to be people designated that are qualified to sign these forms and these records so that they meet the specifications for the FSMA rule. FSMA requires certain personnel qualifications and training. There's documentation of training that's required. There's a bunch of topics that are outlined in the FSMA rule. These have to be signed, dated by supervisor, responsible party. And this is the one, this includes things like the number of toilets that are available and where they are for your workers. If you have fewer than 20, they can use your household toilet. It includes training them on proper hand washing after using the facilities. It trains them. You have to give them training on not eating, smoking, using any kind of tobacco in the harvest area. So it goes into a lot of detail, and this training has to be provided. So, and you have to keep records of it and what you train them to do. You have to have records on providing single-use paper towels, adequate soap and water, etc. How you handle your wastewater from your toilet and hand washing stations. So these things are all outlined in the FSMA rule, but personnel qualifications and training are a big part of the record keeping, and that's something that must be focused on. We have an entire webinar on worker health, safety, and proper training in record keeping that will be coming up later in the summer on this topic. Agricultural water. This gets very intricate. I'm not going to slug through this. I'll leave that, Brian, we'll leave that on the screen. I think there are 2 or 3 slides of this, but I'll just talk about the basic issue with ag water, and people can read these slides. Agricultural water, the key things here are, what is your source of water? Is it surface water, well water, or municipally treated water? And there are varying levels of risk based on that. You have to have scientific data that looks at the presence of coliform and other bacteria. That's the key problem. Let me just say, if there is animal exposure to your water, you have contamination. And obviously surface water is the most exposed. So some of these applications here or specific regulations, regulations that you have to have forms that document how you're identifying and treating your water. Let's go to the next slide, Brian. Leave that up there for a minute. People can look at that. There are specific analytic measures that must be used if you're using municipal water or a rural water system. It's simple enough to have, excuse me, the things that the documentation and verification that they submit to their state health departments or whomever, whatever agency is in charge of that in your specific location. That would be sufficient. Otherwise, you have to generate these records, and it's very complicated and very involved. And we will have a complete webinar specifically on agricultural water again in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. Biological soil amendments of animal origin. In other words, if you use any kind of compost manure or composted manure, it must meet specific scientific measures that the biological pathogens have been eliminated in proper form. One way is if you're doing your own composting, you have to keep track of the time, temperature, how many turnings were achieved to verify that it's an acceptable measure of eliminating pathogens from that compost that or the manure that you're using in the compost. And then you also have to verify that you're keeping the compost free from rats and other vermin after it's been composted. The second choice, Brian, if you go to the next slide, the second choice is if you're purchasing from a third party, they have to provide you with the same records that you would have to keep if you were doing your own composting. It has to be shown to have been handled, conveyed, and stored in a manner and location to minimize the risk of contamination by an untreated or processed biological soil amendment of animal origin. In other words, vermin coming and adding droppings or whatever, burrowing in it, whatever they're doing to spread or recontaminate this soil amendment. Why is this important? Because if you're using this in your field, you have to have a 120-day period prior to harvest. And if you side dress your product, your fields and your produce with this, it gets on the plants, and then you've got pathogens contaminating, and you have to go through measures to handle that with your harvest. So this is a really important thing here. Believe it or not, you've got to have records on how you handle equipment, tools, building, and sanitation. These aren't elaborate, but you have to keep your stuff clean and sanitized. If you're using it in covered products for harvesting, packing, or holding, it has to be reviewed and dated and signed by a supervisor within a reasonable time after the records are made. So they want to make sure that you're not contaminating your product with the tools you use or the buildings you store your product in, and that it's sanitized. I want to emphasize again, cleaning is the removing of surface dirt and grime, and sanitizing is the use of a pathogenic kill agent or an agent that will kill pathogen after the equipment's been cleaned. You cannot sanitize dirty equipment. The bacteria and pathogens hide under the grime and the slime and the dirt. It must be cleaned, and then it must be sanitized. And there will be a complete, excuse me, a complete webinar on these topics as we move through the year. There are even records on how you store your records. And very specifically, they have to be available within 24 hours of an official request. They can be electronic as long as you have a terminal there on your farm. You can't say, follow me to my office in town and I'll get these records. You don't have to have duplicate records if they contain all the information. You have to keep them for at least 2 years beyond when they were created. And you have to have original records, true copies, or electronic records of the things that you are taking account of that we've been going over in this last part of the webinar. You've got 24 hours, as I said, to obtain the records if you keep them off-site. And this is true even if your farm's been closed. Let's say your farm's closed in the winter and they say the FDA or some regulatory body says, it could even be your tribal regulatory body and said, we've had a problem here. It's been traced to your produce. We want to see your records. And you say, well, our farm's been closed for 3 months. It doesn't matter. You got 24 hours to get the records so they can be accessed. So again, irrespective of who is involved in the record viewing, you've got 24 hours. And this again is a part of the FISMA rule. So we gave a lot of information there. Like I say, the cost and management of keeping these records and of potential recalls will be covered in another webinar. So we're going to be very active in webinars. I think we've got currently, Brian, another 8 webinars scheduled, and we have decided to roll out some more as we see issues that need to be brought to the front, and we'll be getting that updated here in the coming weeks so that that can be included on our website. But at this time, I would leave it open for any questions, and hopefully there will be some questions that we have that can be responded to. If not, I'll get to them and get back to people if they'll leave the information.
All right, thank you, HL. I'll just remind everyone in attendance that if you would like to ask a question, or if you have a question for HL, you can either type your question into the questions dialog box in your control panel, in which case I will read the question out loud and HL will answer it. Or you can raise your hand, in which case I will just unmute you and it will allow you to just ask your question and HL can answer it. HL, while folks are thinking about whether they have a question or not, do you want me to start rolling through these additional resources at the end?
That would be good, Brian. I think just kind of scroll through them. People could see what they were. If there's something I mentioned specifically that jumps out, I can and already see here a lot of the Center for Farm Financial Management things that I mentioned, all the ag plan, and all these ag plan files. There's ag risk. It's an ag risk library. There's the OSU material.
I'll also just remind all of our attendees, as you're looking at these resources, please do visit our website at indigenousfoodandagriculture.com, and we'll have a lot of these resources in our resource library. If you go to indigenousfoodandag.com/food-safety, it will take you to our main food safety page, and there on the left side of the page you'll see links to many of the things that we've mentioned here, including where our workshops will be held, where the webinars that are remaining, the information library, many of the resources that the FDA makes available for folks who are interested in FISMA. A lot of those links are available, so please do visit our website because you will find a lot of additional information there.
Here are some of the things, Brian, on from Oklahoma, the cash flow, balance sheet, income statement. They have a rich tradition in providing information for individual farmers, so they've developed a lot of these things. But you've seen things from Minnesota, Ohio, Texas, Kansas, Maine, Pennsylvania. So when we find information, Iowa and Illinois have a lot of information on here. So when we find information, we put it on there. Here's the Small Business Administration materials that I mentioned.
And I know that we're rolling through these pretty quickly, and if there are any of you that are trying to jot down these web addresses, we're probably going too quickly for that. I'll just remind you that if you look in the handouts portion of your control panel, this presentation is available as a PDF document. It's there for you. Please download it. And all of these slides will be available on the PDF so that you can access them that way. And there we have it. HL, I'm not seeing any questions unless you have a final thought for us.
Well, my final thought is, and I've sort of beat this horse to death, but I'm going to take another swing at it. Records, records, records. Keep your records. Keep them up to date. Be honest with your records for your own sake. Be accurate. Be timely, because these things will allow you to adapt to the changing regulatory environment, to the changing economic environment, to the many, many production and market risks that you're going to face, and to actually being able to adjust and measure where you are in achieving your business plan, and more importantly, your family and personal plan, so that you can live a more fulfilled life. So that's what this is about, giving you tools and bringing up topics that will help relieve some of the stress of trying to comply and navigate through these regulations and be continually successful in your business endeavors. So I'm encouraged by the participation today, the number of attendees, and I want to just remind everyone we have another webinar in a week, and it may be the most crucial one we have. The title again is So You Think You're Exempt? I would urge everybody, tell your friends, tell anybody that you run into. If you think you're exempt from this FISMA, just because perhaps you're operating on tribal property, or you're so small nobody knows about you, you need to hear this webinar next week.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, HL. And Janie will be presenting that webinar next week. So I would definitely encourage everyone to register for that and join us for that important discussion. So before we close out, I'll just let everyone know the best ways to stay connected with us are on your screen right now. The food safety webpage address is there, and also our phone number. If you want to just give us a call, if you have questions about webinars, about the workshops, about anything that we do food safety related, please give us a call and we'll be happy to help you in whatever way that we can. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.